We gon' ride it out until it's over, love. Get you what you want, call me the plug. Living every day like I already won. Gone ahead, take the bag and run.
Welcome to Perspectives on Pro Cycling, the Outer Lines version of looking back at some of the careers of some of the newsmakers in the sport of pro cycling. Welcome, Alex Stita from the Great White North up in Edmonton. How you doing, Alex?
Well, great to be on, Steve. It's not white yet. It's the middle of September, but you know, the weather's starting to get a little chilly in the mornings.
So when do you stop riding up there? That's the big question. I think anybody from Arizona would probably want to know.
Well, you know, I ride throughout the winter. Admittedly, not as much when there's snow on the ground, but I put fully studded tires on my mountain bike and just go out and rip around on the single track trails that are all packed down, and you get a lot of grip with a fully studded 29er tire.
Well, I've been to Edmonton many a times, and I can tell you that the people are not only hardy, but they're outdoorsy up there. I mean, I think that sort of, says with the trail system and the way the river valley is that goes through Edmonton, great place to recreate, especially in winter.
Well, you kind of have to, if you didn't get outside and do things outside, especially in the winter, you'd kind of go stir crazy. So, it's if you have the right clothes and some gear that, is used for winter, it's not that hard, and it's actually quite a lot of fun.
And Greg LeMond will probably tell you the same thing about Minnesota, which is probably equally as cold.
I agreed. I think our environments are very similar to Minneapolis here in Edmonton. They've got a river going through the city, trail systems, cross-country ski tracks in the winter, which are great for mountain biking in the summer. Road riding is awesome. You get out of the city, you're on gravel road, it just goes on and on.
So Canadian Cycling Ambassador, I think that pretty much sums up kind of your life and career. You've done about everything in cycling, from coaching to on the road, on the track. You founded the Tour of Alberta. You're a commentator for OLN and CBC over the years, and now with Flow Bikes. You've really made your passion your life. Tell us about, a little bit on not only the genesis of how you got into cycling, but even just how you've been able to take that and make that part of your life.
Well, Steve, that's a great question. I think it's more of an evolution than anything, but, I've always maintained that cycling is my passion. And, sometimes I'm able to make a living from it, but other times that's okay if I don't, but that doesn't mean I stop, being involved in the sport. And I guess primarily I look back on all the people that helped me as a junior rider. They weren't getting paid. The people were just, being mentors for myself and the other juniors that we were racing with. And I just feel like I have to give back to the sport that has given me so much.
And cycling is not necessarily synonymous with Canada, but hockey is. How did hockey play a role in your transition and sort of as a baseline when you were growing up in Vancouver?
Well, yeah, I did grow up in a suburb of Vancouver, and, like most Canadian kids, it was kind of dream of being a professional hockey player. Tony Esposito, a goalie from the Chicago Blackhawks, was my hero, and I really wanted to be a goalie. But turned out that when I started playing, I'd already been a figure skater for a couple of years, 8, 9, 10 years old, because my sisters were figure skaters. So it was easier, I guessing, for my mom to take us all to the rink and be figure skaters. But I learned how to skate, which was really important, because when I started playing hockey around age 11, I was skating faster than pretty much anyone on the ice. Didn't realize it was figure skating that did it, but anyway. So I wasn't allowed to play goal, which was a real bummer. But I loved playing ice hockey, scoring goals, working on a team, being an individual, with the strength that I had, which was mainly skating. And that was one thing led to another. And by the time I was 16, 17 years old, I was, going to the provincial championships and just really loving hockey. But then in the summer, I think I was 16, I decided, I thought, what should I do to stay in shape for the hockey season? And I thought of cycling for some reason. and I bought a 10 speed from a guy at high school. It might have been stolen for $20. I worked on it with my dad's woodworking tools, believe it or not, like pipe wrenches and things, and took things apart, put them back together, and then did some road riding. And then my neighbor 2 houses down, just by coincidence, was a president of the Cycling Association of British Columbia, our state, our province. And he said, you should go out to these time trials, this 10-mile time trials that the Masters Club puts on. And went to that, met some other juniors, and they said, well, why don't you go to this race? It was a criterium in a suburb of Vancouver. And I was just the novice category, and I didn't even have cycling shorts, and I won the race. And then they said, well, you should try this race. And it just sort of evolved from there. And then it turned out that my mom had ridden her road bike with her dad, my grandfather, in England when they grew up, doing all these randonneur events. And all this history started coming out. And because my mom, I think, was familiar with cycling, they understood it. And my parents encouraged me to go and do more cycling and enter bike races.
And so people know you as a road rider, mainly from the epic moment, which we'll get to in a little bit about the Tour de France. But track cycling is where you made your first foray into the sport. A medal at the Commonwealth Games. You're in LA. You did, some things on the track maybe that people don't realize. When you look back at your career, do you think you were equally as good on the track as maybe the road, and maybe should have put more time into that? How do you value looking back at both those disciplines and the balance you had?
Well, I always say to the juniors, young riders that I coach here in Edmonton at our Juventus Cycling Club, it starts on the track. You learn so much about being a cyclist when you ride the track. And because of my hockey background, that working on anaerobic power, which I didn't even know what that was then, but that just means sprinting between the blue lines, going fast and hard, short bursts of energy. Well, that was perfect for track cycling. So when I started track cycling, I had that anaerobic power already built into my body because of the hockey, and I was able to quickly move up inside the ranks on the provincial cycling team for track, and then going to the nationals. By the time I was junior, and by the time I was 18 as a junior, I won every event at the junior national track cycling championships. On the road, I was useless at that time. Don't get me wrong, but that was such a great feeling to be able to use that power that I had. And within a couple of short years, with the coaching from Baz Lysett, who was our junior coach in BC at the time, such a great guy. He was actually also from Britain. He was able to bring us juniors that we raced, I raced together, and we've just elevated to a new level. And without that track cycling background, there's no way that I would have been in the sport and progressed into the sport where I eventually did. So you springboard into the amateur ranks with 7-Eleven on the track. Then you graduate to the pro ranks with the road team in 7-Eleven. You had a good cast of characters on that team. Looking back, how do you characterize, and who were the biggest characters, in that group, which were primarily North Americans? Well, I think we were all characters in our own way on the team, but I have to back up because there's a great story there. So just so happened in Vancouver, as I was just turning from junior to senior, we didn't call it U23 then, there was a professional rider there who we'd always looked up to. His name was Ron Heyman. Ron was a pro at the time and living in Vancouver. We trained with him in the winter. And in the fall of 1980, I was just 19 at the time. And he said, if you wanted to see if you're a real cyclist, you got to go to Belgium and race. So he arranged for me to go to Belgium, found a place for me to stay outside of Ghent with the guy he knew there, Luc IJsselmans. And I flew over there, first time to Europe, no credit card, no phone, landed in Lahr, Germany at the Canadian Forces base because they got me a free ticket to get there on the Department of National Defense flight, believe it or not. Took the train to Ghent, got off the train, and met Luke, this white ghost of a guy, because no one has suntans in Belgium. He took me to this place, and for 2 months I raced all the Kermesse races I could, and actually won 3. Actually sold 3 races, believe it or not, because I needed the money. So get in the break, the guy offers you money, and you get second, and he gets first, and it all works out because they want to win races to get better contracts as a pro. And it was such an eye-opening experience, and I was able to be competitive. Then that Ron then said to Jim Ochowicz that they should hire me on the 711 team. So that fall in '81, I went as a stagiaire, which I didn't even know that was a term, but that's what I did. I went out to race in Apple Lap in New York City and a few other races on the East Coast, and we were firing bottle rockets out the back of the 711 team van, going down Fifth Avenue in New York City. And I was like, I want to be on that team. Oh my gosh. That was an eye-opening experience, and it just like snowballed from there.
So you've got, the 80s were the Wild West for Canadians and Americans going over to Europe and race. Jack Boyer, Greg Demjian, Greg LeMond, Steve Bauer, Ron Heyman, like you said, Chris Carmichael. It goes on and on. It was really the first wave that kind of made and created the pathway for North Americans. True?
Yeah, I would back up even a little further, because Jack Boyer and Mike Neal were both pros in Europe in the late 70s, and Ron Heyman as well. But Mike Neal went to Italy, Boyer went to France, Heyman went to Belgium. And there was the 3 main guys that went and did that. I'm not sure when John Eustace went over, but we could probably check that. But they were the first guys. And then when the 711 sponsorship came along, Ochowicz was able to leverage Heyman's experience, Mike Neal's experience, and Boyer's experience, and use what they did to help us take it to the next step. And it was, looking back, it was brutal. We were staying in hotels with mirrors on the ceiling, paying an hourly rate to stay at the hotel. I don't know, like there was one time in Belgium, we were at like an old folks home that Richard Dioncourt had set up for us. So there's all these old timers, retired people going, shuffling around getting their food. And here's all these young bike racers at the same food line getting our food. Just looking back, just insane.
Trailblazers.
Totally.
So let's fast forward to '86. This team from the States, for the most part, a lot of the Europeans didn't know who you guys were, at least, top to bottom from a roster standpoint. It's stage 2A, as I understand it. And you take this flyer, man, and you're out on a breakaway. Tell us about that moment, which now lives in infamy.
Well, we should back up one more time, because the team had turned pro after the '84 Olympics. I had been racing on the track at the Olympics, and I really didn't feel I was ready to race full-time pro doing 250 kilometers stages or individual races in the next year. So I raced amateur for the national road team, Canadian national road team in '85, whereas the rest of the team turned pro, and they did the Giro right away. First year pro, the team does the Giro because of Mike Neal's connections. And Eric Heiden actually ended up winning the Intergiro sprints at the Giro that year because they had the Avocet cyclometers on their bikes, and they could tell exactly where the intermediate sprints were coming up, and they would do the lead outs right up to the meter, and Heiden would be able to win those intermediate sprints, and he won that jersey at the end of the Giro. So based on that and a few other things that happened for '86, we got invited to the Tour de France. And, again, it was the first time an American team has raced there. Other Americans had raced at the Tour, like Boyer, on French teams, but we were all so raw. No one on the team had any experience racing at the Tour. Boyer hadn't joined the team yet. Och hadn't raced the Tour. He'd raced in Europe before. We had no idea what we were doing. And it was more or less just go to the start line and look at the profile and figure out what we can do on the day. That was it, day by day by day. I looked at a profile and went, there's about, I think there's 4 intermediate time sprints in 80 kilometers, rough numbers. Like, what? Time bonuses, 4 time bonuses, and then a time bonus at the finish? Unbelievable. So I decided if I can get away early, I'm going to try to, get some of these time bonus sprints. I put on a skin suit at the start because it was an 80K road stage. Well, we race 80-kilometer criteriums in North America. We always wear a skin suit because you are more aerodynamic. We don't need pockets for food. I showed up the start line, and the rest of my team were laughing at me, going, and actually kind of horrified too, because they said, Alex, we're trying to fit in. We're trying to look like European bike racers with jerseys and shorts, and you show up at a road race with a skin suit. Now they call them speed suits. Yeah. Anyway, so I got away at the start. It kind of rolled off the front, outside of Paris. It was, windy, and I got out of sight, out of mind, put it in the 12 because we only had a 53.12. We didn't have an 11 back then. And I went as hard as I could. I got 3 or 4 minutes and started getting these time bonuses. And then it was just a matter of hanging on to the brake that caught me. And Phil Anderson was in the brake, and he told me, "Yeah, in the jersey, mate, come on." And I was like, Phil Anderson just spoke to me. I couldn't believe it. And my job at that point was to keep the breakaway rolling so that we didn't get caught by the main group at the finish. So Van der Roden couldn't win the time bonus at the finish. And I ended up just keeping riding tempo. As soon as the guys started doing cat and mouse, I went to the front, rode tempo, just buried myself. And the break stayed away. I didn't win the stage, but ended up taking that yellow jersey plus 4 others. I always remember Phil Liggett at the finish coming up with a mic. "Hi, Alex, you're the first American to wear the yellow jersey." And I was like, "Phil, I'm Canadian." And he just immediately changed. He didn't blink an eye. And he says, "Oh, you're the first North American." Yeah, I guess I am. You're right. Because he didn't want to be wrong. And he coined that phrase, and that stuck with me ever since.
And that has stayed with you. That's the great thing about cycling. It stayed with you your whole life, as that first North American in a yellow jersey. How's that, paid off for you in so many different ways?
Well, I get a lot of free coffees and a few free beers. Every once in a while, it still comes up. But even in my business life in IT, sometimes I'll meet a cycling fan who's a customer or a prospect, and if they find out who I am, they'll immediately start Googling, and then they can't believe that they've actually met the first North American to wear the yellow jersey at the Tour de France. So it's paid its dues in one way or another over the years. It's fun to share the history with folks, that's for sure.
And what about the epilogue for the time trial? What about that? For the whole team, I think that afternoon was memorable as well, right?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, that was memorable in another way. So I had the yellow jersey by a few seconds. And it was a split stage day. So there was the road race in the morning where I got away, and then the team time trial in the afternoon. And team time trial is just that. You got to work together as fast as you can. And in retrospect, I probably should not have taken a turn. I should have sat on the back because I was completely gassed from the morning efforts. And so was Chris Carmichael and Jeff Pierce, because they had been at the front blocking and chasing down breaks. So it was like a long team time trial, like 60 odd K. And I was just, by the time we got into some hillier sections, I was getting dropped. I couldn't hold on. We'd gone through some turns that were like super fast and blind turns. And we'd had some crashes. Eric Heiden crashed. We had to slow down and wait. And pretty soon, Oates and Mike Neal in the car were going, the team might not make the time cut in the team time trial because we're just it was just so awful. So when I started getting dropped towards like 15, 20K to go, they drove up beside us and said, Alex, you're going to have to drop off. No race radios, by the way. You're going to have to, you're going to have, team's going to have to leave you because we might not make the time cut. And they told Jeff and Chris to wait for me and ride with me to get me to the finish. And the guys carry on. And then Pep, Kid, and I just started trying to do the best we can. And they nursemaided me to the finish. And I got to the finish line, I think 30 seconds within the time limit. So I could carry on the Tour de France.
See, and that's amazing just in itself, right? Looking,
yeah.
I think what goes through the Tour de France, if you've talked to any, it's a journey from stage 1 to stage 20.
Every day. Yep.
And you don't know what's going to happen. Let's shift gears a little bit to Canadian cycling. And if you look back at from your era all the way to now to Matteo Del Sen to a couple of the riders recently in the Tour de France. What
Hugo
have you?
Hull.
Yeah, Hugo, exactly. And they've had somewhat of the same journey. They've either had to come up through a North American team, then jump over to a World Tour team, which has historically been European based. Has it changed at all, do you think, over 30, 40 years now for that entry point for Canadian cyclists? And then what about the depth of Canadian cycling nowadays?
Well, I think it's different. It's changed, absolutely. Now there's much more structure built into Canadian cycling systems, whether it's the club-based system, the provincial systems, or the national team system. So there's more of a pathway, I think, that for riders to follow. That said, it's so competitive now to get on the national team. Riders have to be so focused on training and development and, year long. Whereas, for us, I think it was more, we were training hard, but it wasn't very scientific, let's say.
Let's talk about the Tour of Alberta. Went on successfully for 5 years. It took you almost 7 years to really get that off the ground. Talk about the foundation of that.
Yeah, there was lots of work going. Yeah, there was lots of work back and forth behind the scenes to raise some money and get a lot of people, the right players involved. And yeah, it was still a struggle once we got the initial funding to keep going and keep it running and without losing money. Yeah, it's definitely tough in an environment here in Alberta where cycling is not part of the culture. So there was continuous education about what the race was and what it could do from an exposure, a brand perspective. And
looking back at, people don't realize that event, especially the first 2-3 years, had some pretty big names. I mean, Peter Sagan, Rohan Dennis made his mark there before people knew who Rohan Dennis was. He had a breakaway into this dinosaur monument out on the eastern plains, east of Calgary and Edmonton up there. You had other guys like Daryl Impey.
He won. Daryl Impey actually won the race on the last day on time bonuses.
And beat Ryan Anderson, a Canadian.
Amazing. Yeah.
Did you take a lot of pride in looking back and saying, hey, we had some of these huge names. Cadel Evans was there, after he had won the Tour. You take pride in that?
Absolutely, Steve. It was a dream of mine to host the race and to have it run for 5 years was fantastic. And I do take pride. People still come up to me and tell me how much they enjoyed the race and were really sad that it wasn't able to continue. It was a real special time. Absolutely.
So let me ask you a tougher question. You were the founder, and then you were the chairman of that. And, there were some things that went on there, maybe you could say politically, that upended that a little bit. Looking back, do you think there's a way that may have been able to be altered, whether it was relationships you had with a city like Calgary, which, let's face it, they were, they got a little miffed a little bit. And as I came to know traveling up to Alberta, there was always an Edmonton versus Calgary kind of rift that goes on up there. And I didn't know. I thought it was all hockey based. So I know it's a tough question, but did those dynamics play a role in how things maybe unraveled after year 5?
Yeah, I think there were certain players inside of the Tour of Alberta organization that were very Edmonton focused and did not want to share control of the event with folks in Calgary, and that was really the undoing of the event as a bottom line. It became us versus them as opposed to we. Coming from the neighboring province of British Columbia and Vancouver, I didn't really understand this crazy ego battle between Calgary and Edmonton, and I didn't really think it was that big a deal, but it became a huge deal with some of the personalities involved, and it was really the undoing. And in retrospect, maybe I could have been more of a fence mender, between the two organizations, but the die was cast after a certain conversation between our chairman and one of the leaders in Calgary, business leaders in Calgary, and from then on, they never spoke.
So let's end the Tour of Alberta on a positive note. The first national park in Canada to host a professional cycling race, Jasper National Park, which was absolutely just mind-blowing how beautiful it was taking a course through there. Take us back to those couple years where it was in Jasper, and as a proud Albertan, what that was like to host a world-class cycling event there.
Well, it's about a 3.5-hour drive from Edmonton to Jasper, to the national park. And it was certainly a logistical challenge to get the race to go that far. And we did it twice. With a huge support of the town of Jasper. I mean, there's only I think a couple thousand people that live there. They're in the federal park, so we had to adhere to all the the controls and policies of the national park. And so many people there rallied behind the event to help it happen. And we had finishes, 2 different finishes there. One up at Marmot Basin, where I do a lot of my skimo races now. That's my winter activity. I got to know those guys really well. And another one in an area where I never thought we would be able to have a race, just because of the environmental sensitivity of there's a paved road that goes up to these pools, these hot pools. But to have the race finish there was an extraordinary honor to be able to bring the race and share the beauty of Jasper National Park with the rest of the world.
Technology and cycling is the next subject I want to talk to you about. They're both passions of yours. How have you been able to influence through the companies you've been involved in, and take that passion to influence positive change within cycling with technology? And a couple examples maybe you can provide us.
Well, I don't think we can stop technology from advancing, whether, in our world, of course, but within cycling, there certainly are a number of traditionalists out there that say, we don't need power meters in the races, or, race radios, in the rider's ear, and I was kind of an anti-race radio guy for a while, but, it really has, enabled the sport to grow and change and become more modern. So yeah, I think, the idea of power meters, has really been able to allow the riders, as I mentioned before, to train more specifically. And I've even used it myself now with the Sufferfest app to train hard, more targeted and be more efficient with my training time. And it allows more people to become, involved in the sport given limited time that they might have with a full-time job, and be more specific with their training. The other side is the material side. I mean, carbon has actually, obviously changed things a lot, but the next level of technology is going to be something called graphene. Now, some people may have heard of graphene, but when you add graphene with carbon fiber, even a 0.5% graphene into a carbon fiber layup, it can change the way the frame is structured. You can get rid of most of the voids that can happen in a carbon mold, add durability, you can add strength, you can add resiliency or compliancy. It's an amazing material, and it's going to, I know this, but it's a matter of now getting the bike industry to understand that graphene is going to be the new wonder material. It's not just carbon fiber, but it's going to be graphene.
And if you look back now with history on your side, can you make cast a little bit of an opinion on how cycling has really been a technological leader, not just bike, but even if you looked at physiological components that maybe have transferred over to sports like athletics, or even some sublime sports like wrestling, where the training patterns, at least the forefront of that, have really been, the precipice of all that has been pushed by cycling. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's just inherent that, in order to improve, you need to understand heart rate and power output versus weight, the rider weight. Cycling has always been, intensely focused on the weight of the bike and how the materials of the bike can perform. So putting all that together now is, the data scientists are now becoming involved. We see that with the NTT team and what they're doing with data from the riders and choosing riders for specific races based on their strengths and picking the best team for a specific race. So sort of amalgamating all this data and doing some big data crunching on it. Let's be honest. With the drug controls, cycling has led the way. No other sport has the strict controls that cycling has when it comes to drug testing. And this has now created, I think, a world in which other sports are paying attention to and going, wow, is that really what needs to be done in order to create control? Some sports, I think, are even afraid that if they went to the level that cycling does with drug controls, that might sort of open up Pandora's box. But when a professional rider has to go and enter into a website where they're going to be at every minute of every day, 360 days a year, and be available for testing at any of those times for blood and urine tests, that's taking it to a new level. Now, some people might say, well, cycling deserves it because of all the past history. That may be the case, but it really has, I think if other sports were to take this level of consistent testing for athletes, I think it would create a much more playing field for the rest of the athletes in all these different sports. But
has there ever been anybody from the Edmonton Oilers or the Calgary Flames? Have you ever had any dialogue with those groups just on some of the transfer of knowledge from cycling over to a sport like hockey, which is so big in Canada? You're certainly starting to see a lot of that, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's the preparation and recovery here in the U.S. with sports like basketball and specifically football, I think, right now. Have you had any of those conversations?
I have not actually had conversations with any of the pro hockey teams themselves, but I do see anecdotally, I see them using the indoor bikes for recovery after games. They'll sit on the indoor bike for a certain period of time to get their legs flushed out. But I do know that there are many pro hockey players that love cycling in the summer and use it for cross training because it's low impact. It's not like running that wears you down. They need to have time, be able to recover during the summer, but at the same time get a good workout. And cycling does allow them to do that.
So before we leave the technology subject, I want to talk about the rage right now, obviously through the pandemic, of indoor cycling. And you've certainly done your fair share up in Edmonton in the winter indoor. Talk about that, and do you think that's really revolutionary, or do you think it's temporary, or do you think part of this is the hardcore rider versus really the person who's really being introduced into cycling, on a Peloton or a Wahoo or what's your perspective as someone who's, in the tech mode of so much of this?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I've always said, hey, I want to be outside to do a workout. So I do my ski mountaineering racing in the winter, ride outside and with my studded tires, as I said, on the snow. But this year, this winter, I decided I was going to train for the World Grand Fondo Championships, which were going to be held in Vancouver, my hometown, in September this year. Unfortunately, got canceled. But I signed up with Sufferfest, and they assigned me a coach, and I just focused on those indoor efforts starting in January. Still did some outdoor stuff as well, just for grins. But my focus training was all done indoors on Sufferfest with my Wahoo trainer and kicker. And let me tell you, by this spring, I was so fit. When I went for an outdoor ride, the hills that I normally ride around my home, they're not big hills, but I was just like flying up them. My weight dropped. I was, I talk about my sales weight, when I'm, just regular days, I'm 170 pounds. I got down to 155 this spring, and I was lean and strong. And anecdotally, that I was just amazed how much that 3 months of indoor training helped me get to that level that quickly. 59 years old, it really kind of impressed me that I was able to do that. I impressed myself, let's say. So I really believe there's a big future for the indoor cycling training, but I have to say also, it's just like riding outdoors. If you want to just go ride and have fun and join a few Zwift events, go ahead.
You've had a good history and a good run with commentating OLN and CBC up there. How did you view this year's tour, first of all? And then secondly, that experience with Flow Bikes and what they're doing, how has that manifested for you personally and transferred maybe to a new audience in Canada?
Well, I mean, this year's tour was fantastic. I mean, we all never thought it could actually happen, never mind continued through to the end. But it was so exciting. Every day there's something new happening. Of course, the lead change on the time trial was just, unexpected, but, just another way of creating more buzz around the event. So it was a great race to watch. And to work, actually. Normally I'm watching the race at home, yelling at the TV, why aren't they working? Why aren't they attacking? The crosswind section, why aren't the guys at the front? This time I was able to make those same comments on Flow Bikes as an analyst after the race each day. And I really, really enjoyed doing that. Had a lot of fun sharing some opinions, some controversial, but that was fine. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that I can do some more with Flow, in this fall and next year.
And what kind of feedback, positive and negative? What pot did you stir? Because I know sometimes with some of the analytics you can stir the pot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was very critical of the way Peter Sagan was sprinting. And he certainly crosses the line or pushes the edge on the rules when he's bumping guys off wheels. And the one stage where he almost crashed Wout van Aert in that final, that was just shocking to me. Yeah, sprinters can be tough and blah, blah, blah. And hold your line. But, when they start deviating off their line and doing crazy stuff and causing potential crashes, that was over the line for me. And it was interesting. I think half the comments I saw were supportive of me being critical of Sagan, and half were against it. Like, oh, that's just sprinting. That's how they are. Well, dude, if you're in that sprint and you've got guys, slamming like that in front of you, yeah, it's you see your life flash before your eyes. It's not what you want to do with your livelihood. So anyway, that was part of what I was yelling at the screen at. So had some fun, and no harm, no foul.
Biggest character you raced with? Maybe that's the best way to put it. It could be on your team, could be someone you raced against.
Well, I would have to say some of the biggest characters that I rode with were the guys on the 7-Eleven team. But it's hard to single anyone out. We all had our different strengths, or characters, if you will. Greg Demjen was, such a character. We call him the doughboy because he was sort of a little bit heavier, but he could descend like a madman. He had this tube body shape that just somehow turned into a bullet when he went downhill. And he was famous for his dough tunes. So he would, back in the 80s, we only had cassette tapes. So he would bring these mixed tapes of music to the race, plug it into the van, and we would have the most amazing mixed tape of the coolest music that Doughboy had put together for us. So that's just one example of some of the great guys that were on the team.
Well, Alex, it's been great catching up with you. And I think your last statement's a great segue into my final question, which is, if you're going to crash, would you rather crash on the track or crash on the road?
Well, I was not prepared to answer that. I think crashing on the track, well, gosh, no, depends what kind of track you're on, I guess, because, on a wood track, you can usually get a burn, which isn't nearly as bad as road rash, but it can still be bad. I was watching Mark Hirschi descend those crazy descents in the Tour de France without gloves, bare hands, and he's going like a maniac. Okay, admittedly, he's very good at descending, great technique, but he did crash once, no gloves, and he's like sliding, keeping his hands off the ground. Like, dude, so wrong. So, if you have gloves on, and you can just wear gloves with no padding, just thin gloves, but that makes all the difference. When I raced on the track, on the road, I always wore, especially criteriums, I wore 2 layers. Wear an undershirt, even a thin undershirt with your jersey or skin suit, and you have 2 layers, they slide against each other, whether it's track or road, you don't get road rash. Just like when Mark Hirschi crashed, he had the special shorts with 2 layers on the hip, again, keeping the road rash, to a minimum. So I don't think there's any good time to crash, but I think there's things you can do to help alleviate some of the results. So leave it at that.
Thanks for appearing here on the Outer Line, Pro Cycling Perspectives, and stay safe during this time here. And we'll catch up with you sometime shortly.
I hope so. I look forward to it. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
We gon' ride it out until it's over, love. Get you what you want, call me the plug. Living every day like I already won. Gone ahead, take the bag and run. We gon' ride it out until it's over, love. Get you what you want, call me the plug.